Marco Ricci stepped out of the black Bentley, his polished leather shoes touching New York pavement for the first time in 6 years. The night air carried the familiar scent of the city, a mixture of rain-washed concrete, distant food carts. Then possibility. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket, a habit born from years of ensuring his shoulder holster remained concealed. At 42, Marco's once jet-black hair now featured distinguished streaks of silver at the temples. But his eyes remained unchanged, dark, calculating, and tonight, burning with purpose. "Wait here," he instructed his driver, voice low and controlled. "I won't be long." The neon sign of the Velvet Hour glowed against the darkness, casting crimson light across the wet sidewalk. This unassuming bar in Little Italy had once been his unofficial headquarters, where deals were made, loyalties tested, and betrayals punished. 6 years ago, he'd left it all behind, not by choice, but by necessity. Federal indictments, rival, families closing in, and a particular betrayal that still made his blood boil. Marco paused, studying the entrance. The bouncer was a mountain of a man with a neck tattoo and watchful eyes. The clientele entering and exiting had changed, too. Younger, trendier, unaware of the bar's bloody history. Gentrification had reached even this corner of his former empire. His phone vibrated. A message from his consigliere confirmed. "She's inside." Marco's jaw tightened. Sophia? His Sophia? Or at least, she had been. Before everything fell apart, before she'd chosen another path, another man. The information his network had gathered over the past month painted a clear picture. After his disappearance, she'd waited a year before moving on, with Dante Calabrese, his former underboss. His right hand, the ultimate betrayal. For 6 years, Marco had rebuilt his operation from the shadows. Working from Europe, establishing new connections, strengthening old ones, and planning his return. Not just to reclaim his territory, but to settle personal scores. Tonight was about reconnaissance. To see with his own eyes what his informants had told him. He approached the entrance, the bouncer straightening instinctively, sensing something dangerous in Marco's measured stride. "ID," the bouncer requested, hand extended. Marco smiled thinly. "I'm an old friend of the establishment." The bouncer's expression remained impassive. "Still need ID, sir." Marco reached into his jacket, producing not identification, but a thick envelope. "I believe this covers the membership fee." The bouncer hesitated, then accepted the envelope, peeking inside at the substantial cash. With a slight nod, he stepped aside. Marco paused at the threshold, memories flooding back. The last time he'd exited these doors, he'd been rushing to a waiting car. Police sirens wailing in the distance, the taste of betrayal fresh on his tongue. Now he was returning, not as a fugitive, but as a ghost, come to haunt those who thought him gone forever. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, unprepared for how the familiar scents and sounds would affect him. For a moment, he was transported back in time. Then reality reasserted itself. He had work to do. The Velvet Hour's interior had changed, yet remained hauntingly familiar. The dark mahogany bar still dominated the right wall, though now illuminated by trendy Edison bulbs instead of the classic pendant lights, Marco remembered. The booths along the left had been reupholstered in a deep burgundy leather, and the back wall, once adorned with vintage Italian photographs, now featured local artwork. Marco moved through the Friday night crowd, with practiced ease, his eyes scanning methodically. The clientele was a mix of young professionals, neighborhood regulars, and a few tourists who had wandered off the beaten path. The air was thick with conversation, laughter, and the subtle undercurrent of flirtation that permeated all successful bars. The bartenders were a Nua tattooed woman with a shock of blue hair and a bearded man with rolled-up sleeves revealing intricate sleeve tattoos. Neither recognized him, which was exactly as he wanted it. Marco had always understood the power of invisibility, of being the observer rather than the observed. He ordered a whiskey neatly, then positioned himself at the corner of the bar, where the shadows were deepest and the vantage point optimal. From here, he could see the entire establishment, including the hallway leading to what had once been his private office. The door was now marked staff only, but Marco knew every inch of the space beyond the hidden, safe behind the painting of Venice, the concealed exit that led to the alley, the reinforced walls that had muffled countless sensitive conversations. As he sipped his drink, memories surfaced unbidden. Sophia laughing across this very bar, her dark hair cascading over bare shoulders, eyes bright with mischief and promise. Dante standing guard by the door, loyal and vigilant. The three of them had been inseparable. Juan's Marco, the strategist. Dante the enforcer, Sophia the heart that bound them together. Until everything shattered, his informants had been specific. Friday nights, Sophia managed the bar while Dante handled business elsewhere. A routine established over years, predictable and therefore vulnerable. Marco checked his watch. If the pattern held, she would emerge from the back office at any moment. 2. Oversee the busiest shift of the week. A server approached, nervous, new to the job. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Marco smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Information, perhaps? I'm looking for an old friend. Sophia Rousseau. I heard she works here." The server's expression shifted subtly. Recognition followed. "By caution, Ms. Rousseau is the manager. She's in her office. Did you have an appointment?" "No appointment. Just passing through town. Thought I'd surprise her." The server hesitated. "I can let her know you're here. Your name?" Marco considered his options. Announcing his presence would eliminate the element of surprise, but might yield interesting results. How would Sophia react to his name after all these years? With fear? Anger? Something else entirely? "No need," Marco replied, his decision made. "I'll wait. Some surprises are worth savoring." The server nodded uncertainly before moving to other customers. Marco returned to his whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it gently. Patience had always been his strength. The ability to wait for precisely the right moment had saved his life more than once. The crowd shifted, and through a momentary gap, Marco caught sight of the office door opening. His grip tightened imperceptibly on his glass. The moment Sophia stepped into the main room, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't that conversations stopped or heads turned dramatically. The change was subtler, more profound. Like the air before, a thunderstorm, charged with potential energy. She moved with the same grace, Marco remembered, though her steps now carried the confidence of ownership rather than the caution of someone. Navigating a dangerous world, her hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders instead of to her waist and styled in loose waves. She wore a simple black dress that managed to be both professional and alluring, paired with a delicate gold necklace Marco didn't recognize. At 38, she was more beautiful than he remembered, the passing years having refined rather than diminished her. Marco remained motionless in his corner, protected by shadow and the crowd's indifference to a solitary drinker. He watched as Sophia moved through the bar, stopping to chat with regulars, checking in with staff, her smile warm but her eyes vigilant. Always aware of her surroundings, he'd taught her that. The blue-haired bartender leaned in as Sophia approached, whispering something that caused her to glance toward the entrance. Marco followed her gaze to see three men entering expensive suits. Hard eyes, the unmistakable bulge of shoulder holsters beneath their jackets. Calabrese's men. the security detail that accompanied Dante wherever he went, which meant Dante himself would be arriving momentarily. Marco's pulse quickened, though his expression remained impassive. This wasn't part of the pattern. According to his intelligence, Dante handled business elsewhere on Friday nights. Something had changed. Or perhaps his information had been flawed from the start. The crowd seemed to sense the newcomer's nature. Conversations quieting as people instinctively created space around the three men. They positioned themselves, strategically, one by the door, one near the bar, one with a clear view of the back office. Professional, thorough. Marco would have approved had they been his men. Sophia's demeanor shifted subtly. Her smile remained, but tension crept into her shoulders. She checked her watch, then her phone, before approaching the man stationed near the bar. They spoke briefly, heads close together, before she nodded and returned to circulating among the customers. Marco considered his options. If Dante was indeed arriving, the situation had become considerably more complicated. His original plan to observe Sophia, perhaps engineer a private conversation, would need to be abandoned. Confronting both of them simultaneously, in a public setting, surrounded by Dante's security, was not ideal. Yet something kept him rooted to his spot. Perhaps it was simple curiosity. Perhaps it was the need to see them together, to witness with his own eyes what his mind had tortured him with. For 6 years, the door opened again. Marco's breath caught, but it wasn't Dante who entered. It was a young woman, perhaps 25, with Sophia's high cheekbones and dark eyes, but Dante's height and bearing. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged, greeting the security detail with familiar ease, before scanning the room and spotting Sophia. The two women embraced, Sophia's face lighting up with genuine joy. When they separated, the family resemblance was unmistakable. Marco's hand trembled slightly as he raised his glass. The whiskey burned his throat, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, calculating, adjusting to this new and unexpected variable. The young woman could only be Sophia and Dante's daughter, which meant their relationship had begun earlier than he'd believed. Perhaps even before his disappearance. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd anticipated. Scene 4. Eyes that recognized the young woman Dante and Sophia's daughter moved through. The crowd, with practiced ease, stopping to greet regulars and staff, with the familiarity of someone who had grown up in this environment. Marco observed her interactions, noting the respect she commanded, despite her youth. She had Sophia's charm, but carried herself with Dante's authority. Dangerous combination. Marco's focus was so intent on the daughter that he almost missed the subtle shift in Sophia's posture. She had been laughing at something a customer said, when her body suddenly went rigid. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head, her gaze sweeping the bar until it landed directly on Marco's shadowed corner. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Time seemed to suspend itself. The background noise faded to a distant hum, as Marco watched emotions flicker across Sophia's face: shock, disbelief, fear, and something else he couldn't quite identify. For a heartbeat, they were the only two people in the world, connected by a shared past that neither had truly escaped. Sophia recovered first, her professional mask sliding back into place so quickly that anyone watching would have missed the momentary lapse. But Marco saw. He had always been able to read her, even when she thought herself unreadable. She whispered something to the bartender, then began making her way through the crowd. Not toward Marco, but toward the security detail. The message was clear. She had recognized him and was alerting Dante's men. Marco had perhaps 2 minutes before they approached him. He could leave now, disappear into the night, and reconsider his strategy. The sensible choice. The safe choice. Instead, he remained seated, taking another sip of his whiskey. If Sophia wanted a confrontation, he would oblige her, but on his terms. He watched as she spoke to the guard by the bar, her gestures controlled, but her eyes repeatedly darting in Marco's direction. The guard nodded, then spoke into his wrist microphone. The other two security men subtly repositioned themselves, creating a perimeter that would prevent Marco from leaving without passing at least one of them. Amateur tactics. There were at least 3 ways out of this bar that these men didn't know about. The daughter noticed the security shift, her expression questioning as she approached her mother. Sophia placed a protective hand on the young woman's arm, steering her toward the back office while maintaining a conversation that appeared casual to outside observers. Marco couldn't hear their exchange, but he recognized Sophia's technique. She was removing her daughter from potential danger while attempting not to alarm her. The guard from the bar was now approaching Marco's corner, his path indirect but purposeful. Marco straightened slightly, adjusting his position to ensure access to the weapon holstered at his side if needed. Violence wasn't his intention tonight, but he hadn't survived this long by being unprepared. "Sir," the guard said as he reached Marco's table, his tone professionally neutral, but his stance ready. "Ms. Russo would like a word with you." Marco smiled, swirling the remaining whiskey in his glass. "I'm sure she would. Please inform Ms. Russo that if she wishes to speak with me, she can do so herself." The guard's jaw tightened. "I'm afraid I must insist, and I'm afraid I must decline." Marco's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "Unless you're prepared to create a scene in this lovely establishment, I suggest you return to Ms. Russo with my message." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the guard's face. He was following protocol for handling unwanted patrons, not confronting a man whose reputation had once made hardened criminals tremble. The disconnect was evident in his hesitation. "Your choice," Marco added softly, "but choose quickly." The guard retreated, confusion evident in his stiff posture as he returned to Sophia. Their hushed conversation was intense, with Sophia's gestures becoming increasingly agitated. Marco watched the exchange with detached interest, noting how the other security personnel had begun subtly clearing civilians from the immediate vicinity. Professionals. If somewhat obvious, Marco finished his whiskey and placed the empty glass on the bar counter, using the movement to scan for all possible exits. The main door was covered by one guard, the hallway to the back office by another. The third man was now positioned to block access to the emergency exit. They had him surrounded, or so they believed. What they didn't know was that Marco had personally designed the renovations to this bar years ago, including a concealed exit behind a false panel in the men's restroom. An ace up his sleeve, should he need it, but retreat wasn't his intention. Not yet. Sophia finally broke away from the security detail and approached Marco directly. Her steps measured, her expression carefully composed. As she drew closer, he could see the slight tremor in her hands, the only outward sign of her inner turmoil. "You should leave," she said without preamble, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Now, before Dante arrives." Marco smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Is that concern I hear, Sophia? After all this time?" "It's practical advice. Things have changed, so I've noticed." Marco nodded toward the back office, where her daughter had disappeared. "She has your eyes." Sophia's composure faltered momentarily. "Leave her out of this. Did I mention her? I was merely making an observation." Marco signaled the bartender for another drink. "You look well, Sophia. Ownership suits you. What do you want, Marco?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, drawing glances from nearby patrons. At the moment, another whiskey. The bartender placed a fresh glass before him, and Marco raised it in a mock toast. The old friends and new beginnings. Sophia didn't respond to the gesture. 6 years without a word. We thought you were dead. Did you mourn? Marco's tone remained conversational, but his eyes had turned cold. Or did you celebrate? It must have been convenient. My disappearance cleared the path for you and Dante. You don't know anything about what happened? Enlighten me. Marco leaned forward slightly. Tell me how long you waited after I fled the country before you fell. Into his bed, a month, a week. Or had it been going on before? Sophia's hand moved so quickly that even Marco, with his honed reflexes, barely saw it coming. The slap echoed through the knock-waiting bar, heads turning toward the sound. Marco's cheeks stung, but he didn't flinch, didn't react beyond a slight tightening around his eyes. You lost the right to ask me anything when you abandoned us, Sophia hissed, her composure finally cracking. When you left us to deal with the fallout of your mistakes. The security detail was moving toward them now, responding to the commotion. Marco knew he had perhaps 30 seconds before the situation escalated beyond his control. My mistakes? He asked quietly. Or my discovery of your betrayal? Confusion flickered across Sophia's face, genuine confusion that gave Marco pause. Before she could respond, the security team reached them, the lead guard placing himself between Sophia and Marco. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. The guard stated firmly. Marco held Sophia's gaze for a moment longer, searching for something in her expression. The confusion he'd glimpsed troubled him. It didn't align with the narrative he'd constructed over 6 years of exile. I'll leave, Marco said finally, addressing the guard but keeping his eyes on Sophia. But this conversation isn't finished. The guard moved closer. Sir, it's all right, Sophia interrupted, her voice steadier now. Mr. Ricci was just leaving. The use of his name sent a ripple through the security team. Recognition dawned on their faces, not of Marco personally, but of the name itself. The legend. The ghost from their boss's past. Marco stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate calm. Give Dante my regards, he said. Tell him an old friend is back in town. As he turned to leave, the bar's front door swung open. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a clear path between Marco and the newcomer. Dante Calabrese stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 additional guards. He was heavier than Marco remembered, his once lean face now fuller, his dark hair receding, slightly at the temples. But his eyes, those calculating, ruthless eyes, remained unchanged. For a moment, neither man moved. The bar had fallen completely silent. The patrons, sensing the dangerous current running between these 2 men, even if they didn't understand its source, Dante recovered first, his shock giving way to a cold smile. Marco, he said, his voice carrying. Across the silent room. Back from the dead. Disappointed? Marco asked, matching Dante's tone. Surprised, Dante corrected, stepping fully into the bar. His guards moved with him, hands hovering near concealed weapons. You always had impeccable timing. Marco smiled thinly. A skill you never mastered. Always a step behind. Dante's expression hardened. Yet somehow, I ended up with everything that was yours. The words hung in the air between them, a deliberate provocation. Marco felt rather than saw. Sophia tense beside him. Did you? Marco asked softly. Or did you just pick up what I discarded? Dante's face flushed with anger. He took a step forward, only to be halted by Sophia's voice. Enough, she said sharply, moving between the 2 men. Not here, not now. She turned to the remaining patrons, her professional mask, firmly back in place. I apologize for the disruption, everyone. The next round is on the house. The announcement broke the tension somewhat, conversations resuming as people turned back to their drinks. Though many continued to watch the confrontation from the corners of their eyes. Sophia faced Marco again. Leave now, or I call the police. Marco studied her face, noting the determination in her eyes. The slight tremble of her lower lip tells she'd never been able to control when under extreme stress. As you wish, he said finally. But we will finish this conversation, Sophia. All three of us. He moved toward the exit, maintaining eye contact with Dante as he passed. Sue, he added, just loud enough for Dante to hear. Outside, the night air felt cool against Marco's flushed skin. His driver appeared immediately, opening the car door without a word. Marco paused before entering, looking back at the velvet. Ours, glowing sign. The confrontation had not gone as planned. Sophia's reaction. Her genuine confusion at his accusation of betrayal didn't fit the narrative his informants had constructed. And the daughter. Her age suggested a timeline that contradicted his understanding of events. For the first time in 6 years, Marco felt the certainty of his vengeance waver. The Bentley glided through Manhattan's late-night traffic, its interior, a cocoon of leather-scented silence. Marco stared out the tinted window, watching the city lights blur past while his mind replayed every moment of the encounter at the Velvet Hour. Take me to the penthouse, he instructed his driver. Decision. Made. Then find Vito. Tell him I need everything we have on Sophia and Dante's daughter. Yes, sir, the driver responded. Adjusting their route, Marco leaned back against the seat, loosening his tie as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to ebb. The jealousy that had fueled him for 6 years burned differently, now no longer. A clean, clarifying flame, but something murkier. Complicated by the doubt Sophia's reaction had sown. His phone vibrated. A message from one of his surveillance team. Calabri's family leaving the bar, heading to residence in Tribeca. Marco typed a response. Follow, but maintain distance. Observation only. He pocketed the phone and closed his eyes, memories washing over him unbidden. Sophia, 22 and fearless. The night they'd met at a gallery opening. Her dismissal of his advances, unimpressed by his reputation. The year it took to win her trust. Dante's initial disapproval, then reluctant acceptance of their relationship. The three of them had been inseparable. Juan's Marco, the strategist. Dante, the enforcer. Sophia, the heart that bound them together. Until everything shattered, the official story. The one his informants had pieced together during his absence. After Marco fled the country, Sophia and Dante had consolidated power, merged their operations, and built a legitimate business empire from the ashes of Marco's criminal organization. Somewhere along the way, their professional partnership had evolved into something personal. But the daughter complicated this narrative. If she was in her mid-20s now, she would have been born around the time Marco and Sophia first became involved, which meant either Sophia had kept her existence secret from Marco for years, or ... The alternative was too painful to consider. The car pulled up to a luxury high-rise in Midtown. The doorman rushing to open Marco's door. Welcome back, Mr. Ritchie, the man said with a deferential nod, not questioning where Marco had been for 6 years, or how he still maintained ownership of the penthouse. Money answered such questions before they could be asked. In the private elevator, Marco loosened his tie further, the weight of the evening settling on his shoulders. The penthouse had been maintained in his absence, cleaned regularly. Stocked with his preferred brands, preserved like a museum to a life interrupted. He poured himself a scotch from the bar and moved to the floored two-ceiling windows, looking out at the city that had once been his kingdom. His phone vibrated again. Vito this time. Information on the daughter incoming. Preliminary findings suggest complications. Marco's grip tightened on his glass. Explain. Birth certificate lists mother as Sofia Russo. Father listed as Dante Calabresi, and the date of birth. A pause. 26 years ago. Before your relationship with Ms. Russo began. Marco closed his eyes, the implications washing over him. If the daughter had been born before he met Sofia, then Sofia and Dante's relationship wasn't a betrayal that occurred after his disappearance. It predated him entirely, which meant either Sofia had hidden her child and her relationship with Dante from Marco throughout their time together, or there's more, Vito continued. The daughter Alessandra was raised primarily by her maternal grandmother until age 16, when she moved in with Sofia and Dante. The pieces were rearranging themselves in Marco's mind, forming a picture, vastly different from the one he'd carried for 6 years. Find the grandmother, Marco ordered. I want to speak with her directly. Already located. She lives in a nursing home in Queens. Sofia pays for private care. Arrange a visit. Tomorrow morning, consider it done. Marco ended the call and drained his scotch, the alcohol burning a path down his throat. The jealousy that had sustained him through 6 years of exile was transforming, becoming something more complex, a mixture of confusion, anger, and a dangerous spark of hope. If his understanding of the betrayal was wrong, what else had he misinterpreted? What other truths had been obscured by his jealousy and rage? Tomorrow, he would begin unraveling the real story. Tonight, he would allow himself to feel the full force of emotions he'd suppressed for too long, the jealousy that had driven him. The return, now complicated by doubt and the possibility that the narrative he'd constructed was fundamentally flawed. Marco poured another scotch and returned to the window, watching the city that never slept, much like the jealousy that had kept him awake for 6 long years. Marco sat across from Elena Russo in her private room at Golden Pines nursing home. At 78, Sofia's mother still possessed the sharp mind and direct manner he remembered. I never expected to see you again, she said, studying him carefully. I saw Sofia last night, Marco replied. And her daughter. Elena's expression remained neutral. Alessandra. Graduated summa cum laude from Columbia. Works with her parents now. Her parents, Sofia and Dante. Yes, Elena leaned forward. But that's not why you're here, is it? You want the truth about what happened. Marco nodded, bracing himself. Sofia and Dante were childhood sweethearts, Elena revealed. Alessandra was born when Sofia was barely 20. But they separated after that. Sofia wanted independence, not to be a Mafia wife, before she'd lived. I raised Alessandra while Sofia built her own life. Marco's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. She never told me about Alessandra. No, that was her mistake. She feared you wouldn't want her if you knew she had a child with another man in your organization. By the time she realized she should have told you, the lie had grown too big. And, after I left, Sofia was devastated. The authorities froze. Your assets, rival families moved in. Dante protected her, helped her salvage what could be saved. They built something legitimate from the ruins. And fell in love again, Marco concluded. Bitterly. Not for nearly 3 years, Elena corrected. Sofia mourned you, Marco. Genuinely. It was only when Alessandra moved in with her at 16 that things changed. They became a family, the family they might have been if life had taken a different path. Marco stood abruptly, moving to the window. Why, tell me this. Because despite everything. Sophia loved you once. Truly. And I think beneath all that anger and jealousy, you loved her too. Elena's voice softened. The truth is a gift, Marco. What you do with it is your choice. The private dining room at Vincenzo's was set for 3. Marco checked his watch at 11:55. His invitation had been simple. For the sake of what once was, give me 1 hour. The door opened as Sophia and Dante entered, moving as a unit, their years together evident in their synchronized steps. Thank you for coming, Marco said. I spoke with Elena this morning. Sophia tensed. My mother? Why? I needed answers about Alessandra, about what really happened. Marco faced them across the table. I came back for revenge, fueled by the belief that you two had betrayed me. And now, Dante asked cautiously. Now I understand that the betrayal I imagined never happened. Marco looked directly at Sophia. You should have told me about Alessandra. Yes, I should have, Sophia admitted. But you weren't forthcoming. Either. You never told me about the federal investigation. I found out when they raided our home. I was protecting you. No, Sophia countered. You were protecting yourself. Just as I was protecting myself by not telling you about Alessandra, we've both made choices based on fear. The truth struck Marco deeply. Before he could respond, the door opened again. Alessandra stood there, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but I needed to see him for myself. The shock of her presence silenced everyone. She approached Marco, studying his face intently. My whole life, I've heard stories about Marco Ricci, she said quietly. The man my mother loved, the man who disappeared, the ghost that haunted our family for years.